Hi, I'm Dubber. I'm the director of Music Tech Fest, and this is the MTF podcast. Now, I was at South by Southwest this past week where I caught up with Ching-Ching Chen. She's the Vice President of Business Development for Capitol Records, where she's built an innovation center at the legendary Capitol Tower in Hollywood, started the first record label-hosted hackathon, and created an in-house accelerator. Ching-Ching and her team were at South by Southwest supporting the hackathon, where I was lucky enough to be one of the judges, and encouraging new ideas in music technology. I chatted with her about what a record label with a legacy like Capitol can do on the digital innovation front, and also how they're supporting new business in this area, as well as her own history as a classical musician herself. Enjoy. Ching-Ching, thanks so much for joining us today. You're Vice President of Business Development at Capitol Records. What does business development mean in a record label these days?
Business development is a completely new term in the music industry, I'll say. 2 years ago, I started off at Capitol Records as Chief of Staff for Michelle Jubler, who's our COO. And at that time, it was, there's a number of projects that range from operations to ancillary revenue generation. And really, the thought was where and how can we position ourselves as a record label of the future? And so, it started off as one-off projects that here and there we decided and picked what are our priorities for the year. And, before we knew it, it grew into a full 11-person team as we are now. And it's incredible. But we focus on everything from, digital strategy, D2C, e-commerce, and then a lot of our tech partnerships and really thinking about, where we are going towards in the future. What are some of our, startups that we can work with or, tech companies that we can work with to really amplify and create new experiences for our artists.
What's the end goal for you? How do you know when you've been successful?
How do I know when I've been successful? Well, why I chose this job in the first place, is I love music so much. I grew up as a violinist and pianist, and I did opera, and, music was such a big part of making me feel something. In even the lowest points when the world feels like it's going to shit, music, has the ability to really connect across borders, but also, every milestone of my life, I can attribute it to a particular song. And so, for me, that was one of the biggest drivers, because I was like, if I am able to spread how passionate I am about music, and if I'm able to then, support artists that I really believe in to go and connect with fans and change their lives in some way and to make this world a better place, that's what's, important to me. And, right now on the business development front, we're focused on, bigger picture strategy, but really the major priority for us is, if we're talking to a different tech partner about how can we create a music video of the future for our artists, for us, it's about the future platform and how can we use that to make experiences more immersive, and how can we really embed soundtracks into everyday life?
Fantastic. I'm going to go back to your sort of moments growing up with the different musical soundtracks as you go along, but I'm kind of interested, what did your parents do and how did that affect what you ended up doing?
Yeah, sure. So my mom was actually a musician. So she played the Chinese guitar, which is called pipa. And so she toured the world, played for every president when China first opened up. So music was always a huge part of my upbringing. My dad was a PhD in physics, so completely opposite. Though physics was actually my lowest grade I've ever gotten in any school, so don't tell anybody that.
Right, but you brought together music and tech in a really serious way. So it sounds like you're a really good mix of those two influences, really.
Yeah, no, for sure. So like growing up in the household, my mom and I, music was our thing, so like piano, even before I started official lessons, we played for fun, because she actually didn't get me on competitive music track until I was 9. She, music took over her childhood and she didn't want that for me. And so funny enough, it wasn't until I turned 9, discovered violin at school, and I begged my mom put me in official lessons, and before you know it, it became like a obsessive competitive thing for me.
Right.
But
where was this?
I grew up in Orlando, Florida.
Okay, yeah. And was that a good place to be a musician in that kind of way?
Yeah, so there's a really strong contingent of Russian violin teachers and piano teachers there, and For me, it was an incredible, resource growing up. You would think like Orlando, Florida, what? But honestly, I had some of the most amazing teachers and professors who really understood me, knew how to bring the best out of me, and, expected the best out of me.
Right. And you said you were competitive. Were you doing competitions on a big scale, like nationally or anything like that?
Yeah, it's statewide, some national, but literally is going from gig to gig, violin competition to competition. And yeah, it was a really crazy period of my life. For a while, it felt like being on stage was the more comfortable thing for me. And it's crazy now because I am the complete opposite. If you told me to go up on stage, I'm like, hell no.
Wow. So the kind of the predictable trajectory would be you'd end up in an orchestra of some kind. What happened?
So funny enough, I actually almost went to Northwestern because my violin idol, Rachel Barton Pine, her teachers taught there. I got into the dual degree program there and was super excited about it. And actually committed, paid my deposit, everything. And the day before making my deadline decision, I had a serious conversation with my mom about, I'm torn between Northwestern and Duke, I want to do music, but I'm also not sure, if performing for the rest of my life is what I want. Right. Because my mom sat me down and had really serious conversations about, I know you love music as much as I did growing up, but when every day there's a pressure of being on stage, it's very different, and you have to make that call for yourself if that's what you want in your life. Mm-hmm. And so we had really serious conversations about it. And actually, in the end, I decided instead of second guessing, I was going to pick out of a hat. So I picked between Duke and Northwestern because I was like, you know what, my experience is what I make of it, and there's no point in looking back. And so I ended up picking Duke out of a hat. And before you knew it, ended up an economics major, still studied music, and ended up at Morgan Stanley after graduation. So very different trajectory.
Wow. There was obviously there was a thought that business would be one way that you could go. Yeah. Where did that side of things come in?
In terms of choosing to study economics?
Yeah.
Well, part of it is just family pressure, I guess, being Asian. Growing up, the expectations were doctor, lawyer, or, study economics, but figure out what you actually want to do with it. Yeah. And so, when I ended up at Duke choosing economics as one of my degrees, I will say I didn't actually have that much rational thought into it. It was, okay, here's one degree that at least I know I'll make my parents happy by studying it. And, it's kind of crazy how it took me to an initial early career in investment banking, but through all the resources I had on campus, I was able to talk to and meet a million amazing mentors from Wall Street. And for me, it was just a great place to start off my career and learn as much as I can. And I'm truly fortunate of all the people I've come across during my lifetime, but I will say, I've always been very people driven in some of the decisions I've made, and definitely very fortunate.
Fantastic. Now, there's a real tech element to what you do now. Was there any point along the way where you went, what's happening with digital technology, what's happening with innovation, what's happening with startups, that's really interesting for me? Or did that just sort of get dumped on your plate when you arrived at Capital?
Yeah. So it kind of was a gradual evolvement to the role that I'm currently in. So when I first started off at Capital, there was no mandate that, hey, tech is what we're going to focus on. At the end of 2017, we got the mandate to say, hey, start an innovation center, build programming around it, start talking to as many tech partners as you can. But even then it was, let's see where this takes us. And last year just kind of exploded. We launched in April, officially the program itself, which consisted of a number of hackathons, an Accelerator program, as well as a number of workshops and educational resources for the community. And, before we knew it, the first ever record label sponsored hackathon in June evolved into a full-on conference at Capitol Records in December, and we kind of just sprinted till the end of the year. But definitely, we see so much value in what we've created in terms of the ecosystem and the amazing partners we've come across who've opened our eyes. Like we never even understood, the gravity of some of what our partners are working on in terms of, across 5G, blockchain, all of these experts who've spent so much time really investing in their fields. And, we're able to kind of work together with them to take their viewpoints and expertise to apply it to potential, opportunities in the music space.
And the stuff that's coming out of the hackathon, obviously you said you have an accelerator program. Is this something that Capital is partnering with these new companies and startups that are coming out of that? They're owning them, they're just sort of looking after them in the accelerator? How's that work?
Yeah, so the whole goal, at least in where we've started on a last year basis, was core business opportunities that can be, amplified. So everything that ranged from D2C, studio tech, fan engagement. These are startups that we identified that, can help our business in some way. And so for us, it's about facilitating that contract or, getting them into our ecosystem to make sure that, if we do need a D2C solution, they're the ones we go to first. If, let's say on the studio front, we're trying to think about amplifying AI and making it more automated, those are the types of opportunities we're really trying to connect, because I think those are two areas that matter a lot to us. But more importantly, I think the other thing that's really big for us is licensing. I think what we've seen a shortage of over the last few years is new content-based experiences, because everyone's so terrified of, will I get sued by a record label by using their content? And that's what we're really trying to create the ecosystem for, to improve with our new Sandbox license. It's over 14,000 tracks that startups can have access to and play around with. And it's just, really trying to encourage people think about new ways to really push content out.
So the Sandbox license is a really interesting idea. I know that AIM did something like that with the PRS in the UK. They gave a license to new startups to try new things with the independent record labels. But for something like Capital to do that with, what did you say, 14,000 tracks? That seems like a really sort of big, flag to plant to say, okay, we think this is really important. What do you hope will happen as a result of that? Are you sort of looking for the next Spotify or the next, music service that kind of uses catalog in that way?
Yeah, no, definitely looking for new services that amplify our catalog. Like we hate to say we're looking for the next Spotify, because if we knew what we were looking for, we wouldn't be here.
Yeah,
the idea is for us to get in front of as many fresh new perspectives for things that we wouldn't have thought of, because there could be someone else out there that finds a creative way to share content of ours. And, that's one, a new revenue stream, two, a new way of connecting and amplifying our content to new fans.
To what extent are you aware that or not aware, but I guess sort of cognizant of the idea that some of the ideas that might come up might undermine the fact of Capitol Records as an organization? We talk about disruptive innovation all the time. Disruptive innovation disrupts something. And if you sort of seed a new idea and it kind of starts to look like actually nobody's going to need Capitol Records anymore, how do you deal with that sort of situation?
Well, I think the idea of us getting ahead of it is to make sure that we never are at the date where people ask, why do we need Capitol Records? I think, especially if you look at some of the companies that come through, if we can either own a piece of it or we can be a part of the journey and help the music ecosystem as a whole, I think that's crucial, because at the end of the day, artists are going to want to keep signing to us if we're bringing fresh ideas to them. But like, for example, let's take Awesome Mix, which is one of the startups that came through our Accelerator program. They're automated mastering mixing tool. And in theory, you would think that's disrupting our studio business. But, our studio business is actually, a way different target demographic. You're talking about the very high end. And, by actually supporting Awesome Mix, they're not trying to displace our studio producers and engineers. That's always going to be there. There's always going to be
other people.
Well, what we're trying to get rid of is the Craigslist people who claim they can do a mix for you for $80 and it's complete shit.
Right.
And so I think that's something that we really want to make sure, that we, one, are cognizant of the potential ideas that come through the pipeline and can make sure that we are a huge part of the journey and don't get blindsided by another Napster. But more importantly, I think, being able to guide it in a way that really helps amplify and better the overall music ecosystem.
You mentioned a couple of things already, 5G, blockchain. What are the things you think hold the most promise for new radical innovations in this kind of field?
Well, for us, for sure, 5G is a place that we're incredibly excited about with the improvements in speed that leads to potential, immersive content that's easier to consume by the mass audiences. It also means production costs that could be way cheaper to produce, and so for us.
Do you mean like remote recording or?
So let's take a 360 volumetric video, for example. Right now, you see very few artists doing that because it would be exorbitantly expensive to book out a large metastage type, studio. But then, even like from a production standpoint, it's slow, painful. Without 5G, it would just end up being not realistic for every day. When we're talking about getting volume out, speed to market, it's just not something that we would naturally gravitate towards. VR is the same thing. At every marketing meeting, someone brings up that idea, and then you realize that there's not enough households that actually, have hardware for people to consume that. And so I think with 5G, people will be able to consume portable experiences from an immersive standpoint, whether it's holographic content, whether it's 360 videos, whether it's even, animojis of artists' faces. I think all of that would be game-changing for us. And we're incredibly excited to see what we're able to do in that space.
What about AI? How's that shaping up and under the umbrella of Capital?
So on the AI side, it's been mainly, at least on my end, studio focused. So, we have lots of conversations about creatives always obviously being protective about, their soul, what they feel about the content they're creating. But at the end of the day, it's not meant to replace it. It's meant to say, okay, if you are booking out Capitol Studios for a day, are we able to, prevent you from having writer's block by using AI to suggest that next chord or suggest that next lyric? I mean, those are I think, spaces and areas that are incredibly exciting and compelling. And as a creator myself, I feel like that's something that would really reduce the barriers of me feeling like I have to be in the perfect mindset all the time before I can start creating.
Do you get to create?
I still am a wannabe creator, yeah, but definitely not as much as I used to. Just because I hate to admit this, I go home and then I'm like, I'm just gonna watch the Kardashians or something brainless. But I think for me, songwriting's always been an outlet. I can't play violin like I used to, so it makes me depressed. So being able to still spend time, really evoking the emotions through the content creation standpoint in terms of writing original content, it's really a big outlet for me.
How much is the fact that you're in the Capitol Records Tower? This is really iconic thing for the music industry historically. How important is that symbolism in terms of what you do and the partners that you work with?
I think it's huge. Even myself, I walk in every day to work and I'm still pinch me now. You feel the ghosts of Sinatra, Nat King Cole, all the oldies, but also so many of the, biggest musicians of today in and out of our tower. And so, from an inspiration standpoint, I think it's really amazing to take a place that's been a tentpole of music history for the last 75 years, or 76 now, and really be able to augment its mission. But I think it's unique to Capitol because we're the only universal label that still sits in its separate tower. We're not in the Santa Monica offices. And, from a space perspective, we're able to do so much more from an activation standpoint, from a, event standpoint, et cetera.
Right. I noticed that there's some really kind of powerful women in the lead where you work. And Is that something you think is improving in the industry?
Yeah, I think, at Capital, it's actually incredible. 50% of our senior leadership is female driven. We actually just had an amazing billboard ad of all the women who work at the tower. And I will say, I almost forget that I'm in a male dominated industry when I'm at Capital sometimes because of how many amazing supportive women we have. But I definitely think there's a lot of attention being put on it, not just at Capital, but across the music industry. It's also the more, empowered women that you do have who've, made the ranks, the more people are able to help bring up other women in the industry. And I think that's what's really special about Capital, especially under the leadership of Michelle Jubilaire, who's our COO.
Right. How's that changing the culture, do you think?
In terms of culture, Capital has spent a lot of time, especially over the last year and a half, to think about ways we can really think about developing people in-house, And so I think it's really incredible because, everything from speaker events to employee engagement events. We had our International Women's Day event that we just hosted last Wednesday, and all of that kind of amazing programming that's employee first driven. I think it's a recent development. We still have ways to go, but it's definitely a lot of amazing, strides towards the right direction.
What's the big agenda for you over the next year?
Big agenda over the next year. I think, the biggest thing is we spent a lot of groundwork over the last year building up partnerships from both a major tech corporation standpoint as well as startups. And, this year it's really about executing the heck out of a lot of these, opportunities to bring it back to our artists and, be able to help impact them in a positive way. I think if we're able to do that, that's a major win in my books.
Fantastic. And is your mom proud?
Huh? Is my mom proud? I hope she is. She visited me actually when I first told her I'm moving out to LA. She was like, what? Why are you leaving finance? Why are you leaving New York? But it's funny, when she visited me at the Universal Music Group offices when I was interning a few years back, after her visit, she was like, okay, I get it. You're in your element. This is, industry and subject matter you're so passionate about, and I'm very happy for you.
Congratulations, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Perfect. Thank you.
Ching-Ching Chen, VP of Business Development at Capitol Records. And that's the MTF podcast. Now, Ching-Ching wasn't the only person I chatted to at South by Southwest, and we have some absolutely legendary guests coming up on the podcast over the next few weeks, so don't forget to subscribe, and I'll catch you here next time. All the best, and have a great week. Cheers.